Hey, this is Dave Scott. Today we're going to be talking about basic knife making. I got into knife making probably about 8 or 9 years ago. It's a really cool skill. It's not as hard as you think. And some of the things I love about knife making is that it kind of opens up a world of possibilities for making your own custom knife. And it's pretty cool to be using a tool that you made yourself. And so today we're really going to be talking about the most basic knife making you can do. I have another course that's a little bit more in depth called Blade Master, and if you want to make more fine knives with wood handles and stuff like that, then you're going to want to go there and get the Blade Master course. But this is just kind of a no frills knife that you can make with very few tools, and basically just a couple of tools in a backyard and a campfire. All right, so let's see what we got. Alright, so before we get started, let's talk about some of the supplies and tools we're going to need. Like I said, I really tried to cut this down to the most basic things that you're going to need. Supplies wise, we're going to need obviously a piece of steel. What I have here is like a 1/8 inch thick piece of steel. It's already soft. This steel has already been annealed, so it's not a hard steel, and you can buy this at a knife making supply shop online. I prefer to use non-recycled steel for my knives, just because a piece of steel like this will run you, less than 10 bucks, and you can get the exact dimensions that you want, and you don't have to worry about softening the steel in the fire or anything like that. So I prefer to use a non-recycled piece of steel, but you can do this process with a recycled piece of steel, like an old file or something. If you do that, know that the steel that's already like tool steel is already hardened to a really hard to a point where you can't grind on it very easily or file on it very easily. So you need to soften this steel in advance, and we're going to talk about that later. So knowing how to use recycled steel is really neat. If you're ever in a situation you didn't have access to a steel that you could purchase, you can definitely recycle all kinds of tools and other pieces of steel that you want to use to make your knife. We're also going to be needing a little piece of cardboard to draw our pattern onto, some pencils. We're going to put a parachute cord wrap on this handle just to make it really simple, and so you're going to need some parachute cord at the end, but we'll get into that later. The tools that we're going to use are right here, and as you can see, it's really basic. Kind of the only frill in this and like a tool is a mini grinder. So you can buy yourself a mini grinder for anywhere from $15 to $60 depending on how quality you want the grinder to be. But you just want to get yourself a grinder. I have used in my knife making classes really inexpensive mini grinders from like Harbor Freight. They were like 12 bucks on sale, and they work just fine. They probably won't last as long, but if you're looking to save money, you can get a really inexpensive mini grinder. We're also going to be using a metal cutoff grinding wheel and a little bit thicker metal grinding wheel for grinding the edges flat. Okay. As far as hand tools go, we're going to have a couple of mill files. We have a crosscut mill file that has a half round, okay, and a flat. Okay, we're mostly going to be using the half round side of this file for getting into any of the concave areas in the knife that we make. And then I have a big flat mill, bastard mill file that I like to use. So files are not very expensive. You can buy this file for probably $6 or something. This bigger file might run you about $10–15. They'll last you a long time if you take care of them. Okay, and basically taking care of them just means don't file on hard metal with them, and don't leave them out and let them get wet and get rusty. All right. A little extra thing you can use is a spring-loaded center punch. We're going to drill a couple of holes in the handle at the end. This is a helpful tool. If you don't have one, that's fine. Just get yourself like a screw or something, and you can punch a little starter hole for your drill bit with that just as easily. This thing is just nice to have. A magnet. It's really nice to have a magnet. When we do the heat treating of the steel, we're actually going to check magnetization in order to tell if it's been heated up to a hot enough temperature. So this steel is 01 tool steel, and it's a great steel to start out with, and even a great steel even for future knives. And it's pretty easy to heat treat. We need to get it up to about 1500 degrees to get it heat treated. And one of the cool things is that at temperatures over 1500 degrees, this steel will no longer be magnetic. So when we pull it out of the fire, you'll see that I'm going to test it with the magnet to see if it's still magnetic, and if it's no longer magnetic, I know that I've got it over the temperature that I needed to heat treat it and get the steel hard. Okay, so not 100% necessary to have a magnet, but it's nice. I really like this one because it has a little hook on it. It's for like hanging stuff on metal shelves, and so I can hold on to it a little bit easier with my gloves. We're also going to need some charcoal. You can buy charcoal at the store. It's not very expensive. You know, a bag like this will run you about $10. You can also just make your own charcoal. If you make yourself a fire and then kind of spread it out and let it go out before it burns all the way into ash, you can just use your own charcoal. I find that it's just easier just to buy some regular lump charcoal. Now, note that this is not compressed charcoal briquettes, okay? This is actual lumps of wood that have been burned into charcoal, and then they've taken the oxygen out to stop the burning process. So don't buy charcoal briquettes and try this with that, all right? Then safety wise, you know, safety is really important to me, mainly because I've hurt myself so many times doing stupid things that I just got tired of it after a while. So a couple of things: a good pair of gloves is really important. The metal's going to get really hot when we're working with it with the grinder. So you want to have a good pair of gloves that are going to keep you from burning your hands. Also, we got sharp things and all kinds of stuff going on, so a good pair of gloves. Safety goggles, really important. If you wear glasses, probably don't need these, but I guess if you wear expensive glasses, maybe you don't want metal shards coming up and scratching your glasses. So maybe you put a pair of these over your more expensive glasses. And trust me, I have gotten little pieces of metal in my eye probably 5 or 6 times. It's not fun. They're hard to get out, and it can be really irritating. So wear a good pair of safety glasses as well. And then when we start heat treating our knife, we're going to be using some big leather gloves. So these are just barbecue gloves that I bought. They're kind of not fireproof, but they're really thick barbecue gloves for handling hot things, and this is going to keep my hands protected when we're by the fire. One thing that I don't have on the table yet, but that we're going to use later, that I want to mention, is a vice grips. So it's really nice to have a vice grips to grab the knife out of the fire, and when we're going to quench it later. You can use a regular pair of pliers, but the vice grips is better in that you don't have to worry about dropping it. You can set the setting on the vice grips in advance, and I'll talk about that later, but set the setting of the vice grips in advance, and that way when you clip onto the knife and pull it out of the fire, it's set to go. So in addition to the tools that I just talked about, it's really helpful to have some type of vise, and you can see that over here I have just a steel vise, and also I have a workbench here. Now, if you're doing this in your garage or something and you already have a workbench or a really sturdy table to clamp to, you don't necessarily need that. I really do like this type of folding workbench for working outside, and just being able to have the flexibility to work from anywhere. We're kind of out here on this land. We don't really have you know, any kind of benches that are built in out here, so this is a good option for you. And I've just made a little piece of wood that I've bolted this vise down to help it sit on this little folding bench. Okay, so you'll see how that comes into play later, but that's really all that you need. To be honest, you even need less than this. You could actually theoretically do this process with nothing but a big mill file. Okay, so you could shape this piece of steel, you could cut the bevel with it, you could do everything with a mill file and actually make yourself a knife with this. It would just take a really long time to do this by hand. So it's good to know that that's an option if you have limited tools available to you. That's really all you need. Okay, the grinder just makes it a lot faster. So I highly recommend the grinder, but if you didn't have electricity or you didn't have the opportunity to buy a grinder, you can just do it with the file. All right, cool. So let's get into some knife making now.
So it's starting to take form. You've got your riser and your limbs attached now. You can start to see how it's looking like a compound bow. So I'm going to take my 2 8-inch sections of the pipe left over,